Hey guys, so welcome to the third video of the series, and this one is going to be about how to write a formal lab report. So as you did the Fly Lab just recently, I'll be asking you to actually write a lab report for that. So this video is just going to kind of go through the techniques and sections you need to include, little tips and tricks, and all that good stuff. So let's get started here. So the sections that you're going to have in your lab report are one, a title page, which I'll show you a template for, an abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, and references. Now it seems like a lot, but each of them are all very important and each have very distinctive features that are going to be important if you go on to write lab reports in university and whatnot. So a couple of little notes before we get started that don't really fit into any particular section and should just be kind of applied throughout. And one of those is APA formatting. So for this, you can easily look up guides online to find more out in case you have any questions. But the main points here are that you should be double spaced, have 12-point Times New Roman font, and include APA references when you're citing articles or websites online and such. And another thing is that you should not be including pronouns in your writing. So this might change depending on your teacher or professor, but for my preference, I would like that you state things such as it was found that instead of I found that. And I think I have a few examples. So right here, so it was discovered that the results demonstrated this was determined by. So all things like that. And then with regards to your APA referencing, I have a little example here as well. And that is, it has been shown that virtual labs are as effective as real labs. I know, very relevant here. As long as they meet all of the criteria, all of the same criteria. And then I have the reference here. So I didn't actually quote anything from the article itself, but I basically just explained the finding in my own words. I had to make sure the words were different enough, or else it could be plagiarized if I'm not using quotations for it. So yeah, here's a nice little example, and you're going to be using this if you are, especially in your introduction, if you're explaining the way that if you're explaining dihybrid crosses, for example. You'll need to look that up and kind of give a little brief example and explanation. So, but I'll go into that in a sec. So for the title page, so on here there are a few different components that you're going to include, and again, this might differ for each class that you take. So the first thing you should do is figure out the title of the lab, and this might be given to you, or you can make it yourself. For the one we just did, you could say determining dihybrid cross inheritance patterns using online virtual fly lab or something like that. And then your header up top here is basically going to be a shortened version of the title of your lab. And I think it has to be under a certain amount of characters, but just as long as it's relatively short, and I'm okay with it. And you're going to make that one in caps, but you're going to include the running head in front of it, not in caps. And what you're going to need to do here is you'll need to do a different first page, because for the rest of the report on the other pages, I want you to not have the running head portion. So here on this document, we're in the first page here, and it says running head, lab reports, for example. And then the second page, you see our header is just lab reports there. So you can do this just by, when you're on your first page, click this little different first page. If you're using Google Docs, if not, there's different ways that you can do it depending on which kind of Word document you're using. And then you should be including the page number in the upper right corner there. So then, once you have that done, include your name, your institution, which is just going to be your school, and then the due date of the lab report. And that's that. So now for the abstract. An abstract is really just a brief paragraph that gives you an overview of the lab and the lab report itself. So it's basically for anyone that doesn't really want to read the whole lab report, but they can still get the gist of what was discovered, what you did, what happened, that kind of thing. So in your abstract, you're going to be including the actual purpose of the lab, how it was conducted, just like a brief little version of the methods, nothing too complicated, just basically what you did, any important findings, so your main conclusions there, and then it's going to be a max of 200 words, which is really just a paragraph. Now, for the introduction. So the point of this one is really just to explain what the goal of the lab was, what the purpose of the lab was in a little bit more detail, and give the background knowledge necessary to actually understand the lab and the content that it's looking at. So again, yeah, it includes a detailed purpose and objectives of the lab. There might be a few of these depending on the lab, but anyways, these should be pretty clear in before you actually go in to do the lab. And then you should be explaining the key terms here. So with regards to the fly lab, you'll be explaining things like what a dihybrid cross is, homozygosity and heterozygosity, expected inheritance patterns, maybe any Mendel's laws that are really crucial to understanding what's happening in the lab, all stuff like that. And then you're also going to be explaining stuff like what the fly lab actually is. So just kind of give a little brief explanation of the program itself, and then that should be fine. Then you're going to, at the end, you're going to give your main hypotheses of the experiment. And I have an example here as well. So for this one, you can say that, so this is going to be in like a last little paragraph of your introduction, and you can say something like, it is hypothesized that the flies will demonstrate a typical autosomal dihybrid cross inheritance pattern. So that's a little example of how a hypothesis could be written there. And it really should just be, I really want you to include at least 3 references. So whether these are websites, articles, or the textbook even to help you explain these concepts, then that's perfectly fine. But I need you to include at least 3 because I really want to see that you can actually do these APA in-text citations because they're going to be really important later on no matter what you do. And then just make it 1 page. It doesn't need to be longer than that. There's not too many concepts, so it shouldn't be too bad. There we go. And the next section is the methods. And this is where you're really explaining what you did and the kind of equipment and materials that you use for the lab itself. And this is really going to include the procedure, so the steps that you took, and yeah, so the materials like the software. So the way you should be writing this is that if anyone came, well, obviously with some scientific knowledge, I guess, if anyone came and wanted to repeat your experiment in order to verify the results, they should be able to do it using your methods as instruction. So it needs to be very clear, it needs to be very detailed and outlined. For this lab, it shouldn't be too long because you're really just explaining the software and the kind of steps you took to go through it, and it's all kind of there for you. So it won't be very long, but in some cases this can be a little bit extensive. And now for the results. So this is really where you're just kind of showing your findings for the lab. And this is going to include a written portion explaining your findings. So you kind of talking about your main findings and results, as well as any tables and figures that you need to show your findings as well. And you should have detailed captions. So I have a couple examples here, and they're not really to do with the fly lab because I don't want to give everything away for you guys. But so here we have an example of a table. So we have table number 2, for example. You're just going to do this in chronological order. And with respect to your figures as well, they're going to be separate numbers. So if you have 2 tables and 2 figures, you're not going to have table 4 if it's the last one you have. It should just be, if it's the second table, it's table 2. And then after that, you're going to include a title of your table. This one's a little bit long, but honestly, you can, whatever the length you find necessary to actually just give an overview of what is actually in that table, that's fine. And then any other necessary details like a sample or what you use to get those results, just something brief explaining what's actually in that table afterwards. And then your table caption is always going to be right over your table. So this is really what I want a table of yours to look like. So again, not really the borders on the side here, Your title's up top, and it should just look nice and clean and simple. And then for a figure example here, as opposed to a table, your figure caption is actually going to be below, and it will be like a graph or some kind of figure like that. And then again, just a brief title up top here, and then any necessary information down low, like a sample size or something like that. But it shouldn't be too long. Oh, actually, and then also in your results section, you're going to have any necessary calculations. So for example, the chi-square that you are finding for the last step of the lab, you should be showing this calculation. And I'll give you a little tip here. So here's an example of a calculation section. So you can just kind of include it as a subheading in your results section. And I usually find it ideal to make these in a text box actually, because they can take a lot of space because there are a lot of lines. So this way you can have, if you have multiple calculations to do, you can kind of make 2 columns and move your text boxes around like that. So it makes it really easy to work with when you have it in text boxes there. So basically here, you're just going to be including your main formulas that you're using, the actual results, and any lines that you deem necessary to really show there. Next is the discussion, and this is arguably one of the most important sections of the whole lab report actually. And this is where you're going to be explaining, interpreting, and analyzing your results. So you're going to figure out whether your findings were actually good or bad relative to what you expected. If they were consistent with your hypotheses and predictions. So did you predict correctly? Did you not? And then why? Why was it not consistent with what you predicted, or why was it consistent with what you predicted? And then as well, you're going to be including your limitations of the experiment itself. So these are just going to be reasons why your experiment did not go as effectively as it could possibly go. And I have a few examples of this here. So the results may have been skewed by, this is how you would write it. And I just want to make sure that you guys do not include human error when you're talking about that, because this is just something that is done in science. You should not have human error as one of your limitations. So you can say something like the software for the Fly Lab could only provide so much of an accurate version of the dihybrid cross, for example. That's not a very good one, but you can come up with your own there. And there should be at least 2 or 3 in your discussion section for that. And then you're going to talk about if your objectives were actually accomplished and how the experiment could be modified in the future to be more effective. So if somebody was going to conduct this experiment again in the future, give a few little tips on to say, experiments done on this topic in the future should aim to or should avoid if something that you did was not the best, or they should consider when doing the experiment, things like that. So this one is going to be 1 to 2 pages for this section there. And then for the conclusions, so here I just want you to state the major conclusions of the experiment. And these are going to be based off of your hypotheses and predictions. So it shouldn't be too long, just really just state the major findings from the experiment, and that should be that. And then for references, so these are also going to be in APA format. I want them to be in alphabetical order, and honestly, you shouldn't have to make them yourself. If you use some kind of reference generator like CiteFast, or Google Docs even has one that you can integrate into the actual document itself, and it will save yourself loads of time. So references can really be time consuming if you don't do this, so I highly recommend that you do so. Alright, so I'm actually just going to show you exactly how to do it. So for the CiteFast program, and this is just one example, there's tons of other things like it, but this is usually my favorite to use actually. So just Google CiteFast, it's usually going to be the first option there for you. Click on it, and then it gives you the option to either cite a web page, journal, newspaper, book, web image, all these kind of things. So let's say it's a journal article. So we click on that, and here we can go grab the title. So let's say you found the article, you have the title, and you just don't want to make this beautiful citation down here. So we can copy and paste the title, which will just be on the website that you're on, probably. Copy and paste it in there. Search for it. All right, and there we are. So it gives you a few options, and as you can see here, this is exactly the one we're looking for by Dara and the rest of the authors there, 2014. So that's our correct one. We click on it there, hit Save Citation, and boom, you just click on that and it gives you a beautiful citation right there. So then you can just copy and paste that right into your document. It's already in Times New Roman, and you're good to go. So that's it. Good luck with the lab and the lab report. Let me know if you have any other questions about anything you need to include or the way you should write. As I know, there's a lot to kind of take in here, so feel free to let me know, and good luck writing your lab report.